Hello, thank you for joining me once again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are currently on chapter 18 on page 264. Thank you everyone who has been continuously listening all the way through. Thank you for all the new subscribers and thank you for all the old subscribers. I would ask that you share this video so that this information can be passed on so that others can enjoy it just as much as you are. So let's see what we have to hear today on chapter 18, and it's at patience, humility, faith, and trust on page 264. Okay? Patience, humility, faith, and trust. Oh, and the first part is the original text. Believe not what you read or hear. Have faith only when you know. Experience oneness with the universal spirit. Only then will true faith be yours. Unselfish love, kindness, harmlessness, these things you can believe in. Trust only the universal spirit. Know that all things are right for those who do the will of God. Exercise the qualities of unselfish love, patience, and humility, and the virtues of unselfish love, kindness, harmlessness, and compassion. Faith. Father, when I was young, I was told that faith was one of the most important things to have, and that I should have faith in God. Even the texts say something about Jesus saying, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Yes, but mustard seeds have a great deal of faith, and one should not seek to compare oneself to the great mustard seed. I'm serious. Be serious for a moment, will you? Oh, yes, you are serious. I thought you were Peniel. Okay. Then I was taught, ask and you shall receive. But when I prayed, my prayers weren't answered. You know the old punchline to that? You got answered, but the answer was just no. Yeah, I was told that. But then why do they say you will receive? Then they gave me answers like that only applies to certain things, or that I didn't have enough faith. One time, when I was in a great deal of pain, I just prayed for it to go away, and it wouldn't. I started wondering what kind of God would not stop my pain. And that led me to thinking about all the suffering in the world, and eventually led me to becoming an atheist. But you aren't an atheist now. And do you have faith? Faith in what? I know there is something, but I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't really know. You will someday, Peniel. That's what you have been working for. It is a premise of the ancient teachings that faith should not be blind. You were asked to have blind faith by those in your past. Your faith was based on believing in something you didn't know. So your faith was really nothing. We also teach that you should not have faith just because someone tells you that you should believe in something or programs your mind to believe something. Also, just because something is written in a book doesn't make it true or real. And this should not be the basis of faith either. Too many people think just because it is written, it is so, including the ancient texts and teachings. Definitely including them. They are but paper, leather, stone, words, ideas. And they are all for the interpretation by the limited intellectual brains of people in this limited physical life. Instead, the children promote direct experience. That will result in faith. To put it into one statement, experience oneness, God first, then have faith. Then you will have true faith, naturally. In that sense, when I think about it, I guess I do have faith that God exists. Because I have directly experienced, at least touched, the universal consciousness for a moment. So at least I know it exists, and still have faith that something exists that is far more immense. As we said before, when you are out of the physical body and away from its limitations of consciousness, you can have a greater understanding and knowledge of things than you can when your consciousness is locked in the physical. This doesn't mean you have to die. It can be experienced during deep meditation or an out of body experience. In such a high state of consciousness, you can experience oneness. But when you come down to your normal state of consciousness, you don't retain the direct knowledge or experience. Once you have touched and experienced these higher levels of universal consciousness, though, you can have a knowingness of what you experienced. At that point, even though you no longer directly experience total oneness with all, you know that such exists, and you know that there is more than you are aware of. This is when it is appropriate to have such faith. That is what you have. But there is much more when you finally do have a death experience and achieve enlightenment. Then you become part of it and it stays with you. Once you know yourself that there is a God and a saintly hierarchy, a force that flows and interweaves with all things, can guide all things, and you are guided and part of it all. Then you can have true, total faith, even when you aren't directly in touch with knowing what is behind the scenes. You will be able to have faith that as long as you are surrendered to God and the universal will and flow, whatever happens will be right. I can't wait. Yes, you can. But you don't have to, yet you do. And the sound of one hand clapping. Ask Yuri. He only has one. I will tell him you said that and ask to hear it. Enough of the Zen for now. Getting back to the point. Until you have such an experience, there is one other thing you can have faith in: unselfish love and its virtues. You can have faith that caring, kindness, harmlessness, compassion are good things. Even though, without universal consciousness to guide your decisions, these virtues can lead you to make mistakes. They are still far better to have than not. Trust. The ancient teachings say that because of the darkness that pervades most everything and everyone here on the earth plane, you should trust nothing and no one, only the universal spirit and those with universal consciousness. This is a paradox. Because if you are in the flow of universal will and you understand the universal spirit, you know you can trust that whatever happens is perfect in a certain way. Thus, you can trust everything and everyone while trusting nothing and no one. Talk about Zen. Phew. Attributes of unselfish love. Patience and humility are virtues, but applied to spiritual growth, they are more than that. They are attitudes of letting go, surrendering to the universal flow. They are attributes of unselfish love. Patience. Michiel had this to say about it. Patience is usually associated with waiting, but patience as a spiritual attitude does not mean a state of standing still or passive waiting, but rather an active waiting, waiting to see what will come while you are submitting to universal will. For submission to the universal will brings subsequent manifestation of the universal spirit. Heavenly bodies exemplify this kind of patience. So does nature. From the I Ching, hexagram 5, waiting. All beings have need of nourishment from above, but the gift of food comes in its own time, and for this one must wait. The hexagram that shows the clouds in the heavens giving rain to refresh all that grows and to provide mankind with food and drink. Excuse me. The rain will come of its own time. We cannot make it come. We have to wait for it. The idea of waiting is further suggested by the attributes of the two trigrams: strength within, danger in front. Strength in the face of danger does not plunge ahead, but bides its time, whereas weakness in the face of danger grows agitated and has not the patience to wait. From stranger in a strange land, waiting is. From the Bible, be still and know that I am God. Michiel had more to say, which echoed my earlier problems with concentration during meditation. Patience is very pertinent to self-discipline and meditation. Almost always, a person who begins to meditate will get frustrated. The separate self rebels against the attempt to transcend it, and it will shift the mind into high gear, jabbering away and doing everything it can to distract the concentration. For example, Furthermore, getting impatient with oneself because of a failing or self-discipline of any kind gives the separate self just what it wants. Such frustration is accompanied by stopping the self-discipline and feeding of negative thoughts. That's how the separate self succeeds in distracting you and getting you off course. These are tricks the self is using against you, pulling at you with, and they can only be overcome by having the patience to be consistent and persevering. Instead of wasting time and giving energy to the separate self by getting ahead with yourself, simply start your meditation again or start your self-discipline again. If you do this, you defeat its tricks and eventually win. Such patience pays off. From the I Ching, hexagram 52, keeping still, mountain. When a man has thus become calm, he may turn to the outside world. He no longer sees it in the struggle and tumult of individual beings, and therefore he has that true peace of mind which is needed for acting in harmony with them. Whoever acts from these deep levels makes no mistakes. Selfishness has created all our problems. Everyone desperately cries out for happiness. Tolerance, humility, and patience are things that make for happiness, yet most people avoid them. And few are willing to pay the price for happiness, transcending the separate self by living a life of unselfish love. It is simple. Cause and effect. The seed sown must one day be reaped. We disappointed others in the past. When we find ourselves being disappointed, we can learn patience. Patience gives us all of time and space to understand things. When we use our free will and mind to walk a path of spiritual growth, our return to oneness is accompanied by suffering. There is no way around it. We must endure this suffering with patience, understanding, and humility. The more humble we are, the more quickly and easily we will finally return to oneness. Humility. Humility is the opposite of being egotistical or self-centered. It is the way of true love, being receptive to God, surrendering to the universal spirit, the universal will, flowing and being in harmony with the universe. Humility is the most endearing and beautiful quality, but it is the most important quality you could ever have as a student or a true teacher serving God. In one of my earlier courses with Elder Raja, he tried to tell me something that I needed to hear very badly, but I didn't have ears to hear yet. To a person who lacks humility, appearing to be right is more important than actually being right, which might require admitting making a mistake in order to correct oneself so they can actually be right. A person who is humble doesn't personally or selfishly care if they are right or wrong. They are just concerned with being right for the sake of helping others. Thus, they are more often right than wrong and will more quickly correct any mistake if they find they are wrong. They also seek perfection in the service of God and welcome the criticism of others so that they may correct mistakes they have missed. Having the attention of others is also important to those who lack humility. Egotism, self-centeredness, pride, in the sense of being personally proud, and its close relative vanity are the opposite qualities of humility. The egotistical and self-centered person wants to control everything his or her way and sees his or herself as the most important thing there is and the thing which all other things and all other beings revolve around. The prideful person wants credit for their accomplishments. The humble person attributes all of their success, capabilities, and accomplishments to simple facts of reality or God working through them, rather than to their own prideful abilities. Then he looked directly at a new female novice who was fixing her hair while he spoke and said, "The person who gives importance to physical appearance also doesn't understand the beauty of humility." Michiel was quite fond of this saying. Rather than the egotistical attitude of the separate self, which is one of being a great mountain, humility is having an attitude of being a receptive little valley. Nature wears down the great mountain and fills the valley with rich topsoil, lakes, and abundance. Thus, a person who is truly humble and in need cannot be passed by and is made great by God. Zion's favorite reference to the subject was, "Nature abhors a vacuum." My old Zen archery teacher's favorite saying was, "A cup must be empty before it can be filled." A humble person who is not full of their own self centered thoughts and information is able to be filled with wisdom from the universal spirit. A person with a humble attitude learns very quickly, adapts to situations easily, and quickly flows with whatever changes are presented to them by life or people, and can communicate and relate to others better than anyone else. Why? Simply because they get out of their own way. They get their self out of the way of dealing with the rest of the world and reality. Thus, their separateness doesn't wall off their openness to others or anything in life, nature, or the universe. Rather than putting time and energy into themselves or defending themselves or their ideas, they keep an open mind and consider the input of others. They also don't wall off their own unselfish love and compassion for others. Often, students, like animals, will seek to establish a pecking order amongst other students. Everyone wants to consider themselves more evolved or higher than the other. Generally, the ones that are the most concerned with this are the least humble and thus the least evolved. Jesus emphasized this at the Last Supper. Remember the earlier story? It was a custom to wash the dust off a guest's feet, but the apostles were all too important to lower themselves to wash the others' feet. So Jesus did it, shocking them and driving home the important point of humility, reminding them that the greatest among you would be the servant to all. In the end, those who make it their priority to be number one will be the last. And those whose priority is to be humble will be number one and not care whether or not they are number one. Humility goes to the movies. Movies are such a powerful form of entertainment, combining the elements of storytelling, acting, and music, can touch and inspire people like nothing else. Below are some wonderful spiritual movies I would recommend for inspiration and understanding. If you can't find them locally, you can rent them through the mail or buy them. You may want to do that so you can see them more than once or show them to family and friends. Here are two companies that have most of these movies for rent and sale. Best Video 1-800 Rare Vid. The website is www.bestvideo.com. Video Vault 1-800 Vault 66 at www.videovault.com. Groundhog Day. Bill Murray, excellent parable for reincarnation and learning to give and care about others. Kung Fu, the original, an old TV series and pilot movie, not the new series Kung Fu, The Legend Continues. Lots of examples of humility in general and the humble attitude a student monk must have to learn and grow. Lots of good spiritual lessons between a few Kung Fu fighting scenes. Lost Horizon, the story of a place called Shangri-La. There is an old black and white version directed by Frank Capra. It's a Wonderful Life, starring Ronald Colman, or a newer color version starring Peter Finch, Michael York, Liv Ullmann. It's a musical also with a Burt Bacharach soundtrack and score. Both versions are based on the James Hilton novel, which mysteriously somewhat depicts our Shangri-La monastery and community. Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which I would like to talk about here. Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon was beautifully filmed by the famous Italian director Franco Zeffirelli, Romeo and Juliet, and has a soundtrack by Donovan. It is the story of Saint Francis of Assisi. It contains many examples of humility, but the scene where Claire expresses her realization of humility to Francis is one of the nicest examples. Francis has long ago left behind the normal world and lives a simple life as a beggar monk, serving God and attending the poor and infirm outside the city. Even though Claire is an exceptional person, and even prior to Francisco's St. Francis changes, she cared for the lepers who were exiled from the town. She had not dedicated her life to serving others or to God. And while there was an obvious bond and attraction between Claire and Francis, an appreciation of his changes and work, she nevertheless remained with her wealthy family in the city. One day she comes running through the fields, happily calling for Francis. When she finds him, she asks to be taken into his order and essentially declares, I don't want to be loved anymore. I want to love. I don't want to be understood any longer. I want to understand. This moment in the movie is an incredibly touching and beautiful expression of humility. Unfortunately, the enlightenment of St. Francis is one of those one in a billion events, and since he has no tradition to properly prepare or train him for it, and no true teacher, it left him confused and with many problems. Yet he was looked after to a great extent, and his enlightenment, his great love, and broader perspective on life was undeniable and a beautiful sight to behold. Strange Cargo with Clark Gable, a hardened, cynical criminal condemned to years in an old French swamped island type prison, suddenly encounters a new prisoner, a mysterious, kind, Christ-like prisoner. He then escapes with other convicts and the Christ-like prisoner and comes to a personal crossroad in his path. He faces his karma, and at the most critical moments in his life, he ultimately chooses to lend his will to the good part of himself. In doing so, he ultimately finds peace and the love of a good woman. Meet John Doe with Gary Cooper. Wonderful story about two things: the importance that the average person on the street can have the John Doe, the John and Jane Does of the world, and how simple kindness, humility, and caring could make this world a virtual paradise. Also illustrates how the selfish, powerful dark ones of this world do everything they can to prevent this. Very inspiring. Beyond Tomorrow. Three lovable old men die in a plane crash, but remain on the earth plane as ghosts to watch over and help a good hearted young couple, one of which is facing the dangers of getting sucked into selfish, superficial, and materialistic existence. Excellent parable of self sacrifice and love. Doctor Strange. TV movie, not made all that well or totally true to the incredible metaphysical stories it was based on, but still a great story of good against evil, humility, and how many things that are unseen by most do really go on in the world. Circle of Iron. Basically, a martial arts movie with many Zen, humility, and other lessons. Star Wars. A classic parable of good versus evil and the great fight between them on many different levels. Brother Orchard. Cute, wonderful movie with Edward G. Robinson as a tough guy gangster who goes to Europe trying to buy class. When he returns, his former second in command, Bogart, tries to kill him. Left for dead, monks from a local monastery who raise flowers help him recover. At first, he just figures it's a good hideout and approaches being a monk and working in the garden with the same scheming, selfish attitude that got him to the top of the gangster ladder. He eventually changes and discovers real class there. You can't take it with you. A Frank Capra film, heartwarming story about a zany but extraordinary kind and open minded family who are thrown together with a powerful socialite family through the proposed marriage of their children. The results are both hilarious and fascinating. Resurrection. Ellen Bernstein, a great movie about a woman who has a near death experience that changes her life in many ways, and more than once. The Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. This classic depicts the story of Moses. Even if you've already seen it, next time watch it with an eye towards ego and humility. Jesus Christ Superstar, a musical that may be a bit honky and dated, but it's one of the best depictions of Jesus that we've seen. In order to really get the feeling for it, you have to listen to the lyrics of the song. If you don't, if you do that, you'll get a new insight into the being known as Jesus and his experiences, along with some really good lessons. Joseph. This movie beautifully illustrates the value and compassion and forgiveness. Joseph is put through many tests and trials through his kindness, honesty, and devotion to God. He overcomes them all. He had 12 brothers, like the 12 apostles, and in the end, he helped them in spite of their treachery towards him. His forgiveness and great love transformed this situation into one of love and unity. And the rains came. This takes place in India in the early 1900s. Myrna Lowe plays a dissatisfied, rich, and superficial woman who is visiting there. Tyrone Powers plays a kind doctor. A huge rainstorm hits. Excuse me. A huge rainstorm hits and major floods wash over the land, killing many people. The special effects are quite good considering it's an old film. Next, a plague hits them, and even more people are dying. One of the nicest things about this film is seeing Myrna Loy evolve and become a caring person. She begins taking care of the sick and dies herself. Great soulmate movies. Since we are on the subject of movies, we may as well mention a few exceptional soulmate, spiritually romantic movies. Peter Ibbotson with Gary Cooper. After being separated from his soulmate as a child, Peter accidentally finds her as an adult. He unjustly ends up imprisoned for life, yet their mutual dreams bring them together every night until they finally join together forever. Portrait of Jenny, a supposedly true story surrounding a painting bought by the filmmaker. A tale of a ghostly girl with a beautiful spirit who appears at different ages as she grows up, crossing over different time zones to be with her soulmate. Her soulmate was a starving artist whose only remarkable painting was his portrait of Jenny. Somewhere in Time. Christopher Reeves, Jane Seymour. Wonderful story in which he realizes his soulmate lived in an overlapping earlier time period, in which he had already hypnotized himself to travel back in time to be with her. And he does it again, paradoxical, very romantic. Sticks and Stones. The opposite side of the coin to the I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine kind of love that most people have is the I won't scratch your back if you don't scratch mine polarity. People sometimes refuse to love or care about someone who doesn't love or care about them. Even people who have spiritually grown significantly and are generally more loving, compassionate, and caring to most people can shut down if someone dislikes them. Or they even just think that someone doesn't care about them as much as they want them to or expect them to. This is a sad and serious predicament because most people don't love or care about others. So you'll have to scratch almost everyone you meet off of your so you'll have to scratch almost everyone you meet off your who to care about list. And if they never find anyone to care about them, how will they ever start caring about others? I had one elder student who was very aware and very compassionate ordinarily. But if someone didn't like her, disliked her, or disappointed her as far as their caring, she would stop loving, stop caring about that person. Her excuse was that she didn't want to be anyone's doormat. I guess only doormats unselfishly love. And only those who love others more than themselves will be one with universal spirit. Then I will be a doormat. Other people stop loving just because they are personally hurt at the other person isn't loving as much as they could be or aren't giving them love at all. I'm not talking about letting someone do destructive to you or anyone else. I'm just talking about words here or ego insulting actions or lack of love and caring from someone else, not physical harm. Sticks and stones can break your bones, and you should do something about them if possible. But words can never hurt the real you. Someone can only injure your ego, your selfish, separate self, not the real you. And if you are truly humble, there is no target for the arrows being slung by someone else's separate self. If you can be offended, how can you help someone else? People want to help. People you want to help will sometimes deliberately try to offend you just to defend their separate self. But when you are unselfishly loving, it doesn't matter what someone thinks about you or says about you. You see them as an upset child who needs love. You realize that the reason they are striking out at you is because they have problems that need healing and transcending, problems that need your love and help. Sure, it hurts, and it can make you sad when someone you love doesn't love you. But not loving them isn't going to help you or them. Whereas continuing to love them, even through your own pain, just might. My piece of humble pie. You cannot really learn. You cannot really learn unless you're humble, period. You cannot grow unless you are humble, period. To be humiliated, which is often looked at as a bad thing, is a great goodness. Being appreciated, given attention to, glorified, praised, those are harmful to humility. Humiliation could be the greatest gift someone could give to you. To be willing to be a fool and to really see and admit mistakes and shortcomings is what makes true greatness in anything. Like I mentioned earlier, when I was young and first discovered and went to the monastery, I was thrilled. But I was a very egotistical young man. My separate self was proud and strong. I thought I was great. I was sorely lacking in humility. And I didn't think there was really very much anyone else could teach me. This was all secretly, of course, inside me, semi subconsciously. And it is in many spiritual orders, it is tradition to take or be given a new name when one starts their new monastic life. I had been bugging Zain for a name for quite some time, and he seemed to avoid it, but finally he gave it to me. He recognized my monstrous ego and gave me an appropriate name. No, it wasn't Godzilla or Frankenstein. It was the name of a character from history. It was a very famous ruler, and depending on how you looked at it, a great and powerful leader. But this character was someone whose ego was so great that he had thumbed his nose at God. I didn't know that at the time. Zain told me to go to the library and look the person up, and that there were many rulers of the same name. He said that because they had all He said that because they all had the same name, and he wouldn't tell me which one I had been. I would have to figure it out for myself, which one of them I was. Of course, I chose the one who sounded the greatest. But Zaim was trying to tell me something about myself when he gave me that name. His intent wasn't for me to go on an ego trip about having been this great ruler in the past. It was for me to realize my ego and the type of ego I had. But he knew there was no point in pointing it out to me then. I wouldn't have listened. So I took it to be a great name, which such so I took it to be a great name, such was my ego. Soon the pressure on my separate ego was seemingly unbearable. Everyone always seemed to be in my face, pointing out my faults and showing me ways to improve. How dare they? From a humble point of view, this is food for the famished. But from a selfish state of mind, it's like being force fed the kinds of food you hate. For someone who has an attitude they don't really want to see any truth about themselves, it is a horrible nightmare. It means they don't really want to change. Also, as a consequence, I focused only on the insult of being corrected and the humiliation and destruction of self esteem that came from being told I was always falling short. I was focusing on the ego irritation rather than my spiritual growth. I began to consciously and subconsciously do things to create problems, ultimately resulting in my being asked to leave by a council of the inner circle. I put up an appropriate argument, but really hoped to leave deep inside. My selfish, separate self, my ego, had had enough, and I was letting it gain back lost ground. Upon my arrival back in my old life, I had found it to be a breeze. Unbeknownst to me, even the little bit of forced ego transcension I had gone through made the previously big problems of my life seem insignificant. Life was easier without some of my baggage, but slowly I became snared in the web of my own selfishness again. It had only been 6 months, but like a cancer that wasn't completely eradicated, my ego grew back. The result problems in my life grew back, and the disease of my separate self overtook me. My life fell apart. My girlfriend left me. I wasn't even a legal adult yet, but it seemed like my life was over, disintegrating into miserable. It was all worse than ever. I became deathly ill, and on my deathbed, I accidentally discovered what my name really meant. I saw the hysterical character I was named after being played in a movie on TV as I laid in bed with a fever. It was God revealing it to me. What a monumental, egoed out jerk this guy was. The realization of my grand egotism hit me like a ton of bricks. I finally saw myself in all its glory. I called a Native American healer I knew, who helped me with my illness. I rapidly recovered and returned to my teacher. I couldn't communicate with Zayn as well as I would have liked. I was still a puppy, and my newfound humility and new respect for him made it difficult to express myself well at the time. But I told him something like I had realized that if I could only be as great as his little finger, I would be greater than my entire being, and would be able to accomplish much more. I told you it wasn't a very good expression. Regardless of the lousy analogy, he understood my humility, took me back, and I began my real growth. And it happened fast. This time, I wanted to change. I wanted to give, and I welcomed any chance to see myself so I could get better. Thus, this time, it was very easy in comparison. One day, I was sitting in meditation in a room adjacent to where Zayn was eating and speaking to a small group of his elder monk students. I was already feeling elated in my meditation. My newfound humility had transformed something inside me, and all of a sudden, my kundalini shot up my spine and filled me with the light and love of God. While this was happening to me, Zayn got up from his meal, came up to me, touched the energy coming out of the top of my head and gave me a new name. He will be called Peniel. He Peniel. He is now my eldest. I don't bother asking at the time what it meant. I was too high from being full of bliss and spiritual energy to care. In fact, I never asked. It just came to me one day. Ironically, I later found out that the bigger the ego, the more powerful one can manifest the universal spirit. Once that ego becomes a servant of the universal spirit, how appropriate. Now, do you want to have a hard time and protect your ego so others will think you're right all the time? Or do you want to have an easy time and be humble and become truly right all the time? Do you want others to think you're great, or do you want to be great? You are free to choose, and you will live with the consequences of any choice you make. Okay, that is the end of chapter 18. We have been reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. That's his name. Thank you for listening. I am really enjoying this, and I believe that you are enjoying it as well because you are continually listening. So until next time, we will be on chapter 19 on page 274 at the part of The Children of the Law of One, Basic Metaphysics of Science Magic. Okay?